Well, thanks everyone for watching again. Today, my guest is Spencer. So, Spencer, thank you so much again for being willing to share. Would you just start out by introducing yourself and just sharing a little bit about your background and your faith background?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name's Spencer. I'm a Catholic school teacher in a large Midwestern city. I wasn't raised Catholic by any means. I was raised Presbyterian. I became Catholic about, trying to put a date on it, almost 3 years ago or so. My wife is a cradle Catholic, and so that had a large influence on me becoming Catholic. I never thought honestly never really thought I would, and I considered it once or twice before I actually did. But I'll probably talk about it. I actually never really thought I'd become Catholic, and so it was definitely a somewhat humorous moment. Like God definitely, showed me up a bit there when I decided to become Catholic. And so it's been, great journey. I mean, obviously highs and lows, but it's been, very, very rewarding, both spiritually, and intellectually. Just made my life a lot better.
That's awesome. So you weren't raised Catholic. Were you raised religious with a religious background?
Yes. So we were, my family, we were Presbyterian-ish growing up. We always went to Presbyterian churches when I was younger. We moved at one point when I was in middle school, and we did a little bit of church shopping there. But pretty much my entire life growing up, we went to a Presbyterian church. It was PCUSA for a while. All the Presbyterian churches we went to, I think it was like 2 or 3. They were PCUSA. My parents' home church is another Presbyterian denomination now. But interestingly, I actually went to Catholic school for 2 years, for 7th and 8th grade, which I thought was kind of funny because, my parents actually, I think my mom considered converting at one point too when we were in middle school, but she never did. And my parents were very involved in our Presbyterian church. We were very involved in youth group, going to all the summer camps, all that type of stuff. And so there is a little bit of humor to me that we did go to a Catholic middle school. But it was a good school, and so my parents wanted to send us, give us the best chance. So.
Gotcha. What was your impression of Catholicism going to a Catholic school?
Some of it depended. Some of it was clouded by, I don't want to say like teenage angst, but a lot of like, when you're in middle school, there's cliques and stuff like that. And so there's it's a very small school, and there are some of us non-Catholic kids, and sometimes we felt like, the Catholic kids had like a little clique they were all in. We felt excluded sometimes. A lot of that was just being a, silly little, middle school student. What's funny was, my middle school did, awards for different subjects and stuff. And at least 1 year I won the religion award, and I was the Presbyterian kid out of Catholic school, which I thought was kind of funny. Overall it was nice, middle class suburban type, Catholic middle school. I was starting to understand a little bit more about my faith then. That it doesn't really happen until after middle school that I really started doing a deeper dive into my religious beliefs. Because I was raised in the church and like in a church setting, but it wasn't like, my family I feel like the situation would be different if I was raised in a more traditional Southern Baptist or evangelical type family that a lot of my friends were raised in. And so we talked about that stuff, but it wasn't, over the top everywhere all the time. That stuff was much more, like good Presbyterian. A lot of it was a bit more reserved and less emotional and stuff like that. But I did think, some things were kind of weird here and there. I thought some of the Mary stuff was a little weird, but that was when I was being, I guess, like angsty and felt like I was, in an out group or whatever. But overall, like I didn't really, think too much about it. Just a nice middle school experience, I guess, and that was really, my only experience with Catholicism for a while.
Gotcha. So then I guess you went on to high school, maybe went on after that to college, etc. What were you, when did you become maybe more interested in Catholicism or faith in general?
Yeah, so I guess, I became more interested in faith in general when I went to high school, and the youth group I was in, it grew a little bit. We started going to like these youth conferences. And it was funny because, growing up in a Presbyterian church, like the one we went to when I was a kid, like we moved when I was in middle school, and the one we went to before was a lot older congregation, much more straight-laced. They had a choir with robes. It was a very formal church setting, and then suit and tie all the time. And then we moved, and we go to a different one that we had some friends we knew at, and a lot more relaxed. No suits, no ties. But still, like, Presbyterians aren't very emotive in how they sing. You don't really see anybody raising hands, or if you do, it's kind of like, what are they doing, right? It's very weird. So when we first started going to these, like Student Life, or what the name is, they had like Louis Giglio speak, and like Chris Tomlin playing music, very standard, like, or David Crowder band, right? A very standard evangelical stuff I had never really been exposed to. Like, it was only through youth group that I encountered, like in high school, that I encountered like Switchfoot and Lion King and stuff like that. I had no, like, growing up, I had no knowledge of any of this stuff. And so we start going to these things, like, especially these summer conferences. I'm just like, full of like Baptists and Methodists and non-denominational people. I'm like, what on earth are they doing? Like, what's with this hand raising? Like, what is all this stuff? Like, I was like, what? Like, and they like altar call type things. And so, in some ways, it was legitimate, but they do, I guess there is a little bit of, this will sound more negative than I intend to, but there's a little bit of emotional manipulation, right? The music they play, like, if you want to accept Jesus in your heart, you come on up here. And so, I responded to those altar calls they had like every night and stuff like that. And it really like was a very emotional experience. And, I had those a couple of times in high school, and that's kind of like when I started trying to understand faith more, trying to be more serious. I went through confirmation around that time at, my Presbyterian church, and trying to understand Presbyterianism a little bit more. And, I went off to college. I was very involved in youth group organization called Young Life. I was involved in that for a good little bit in college. But it was my sophomore year where I met who would become one of my best friends. We were in each other's weddings. My friend Justin. He's a lifelong Catholic. He's a very devout Catholic. We were roommates starting our second year. So that's really when I started to meet someone that was actually Catholic. And then that's also that sophomore year, my second year in college, is when I also met, the woman who would be my wife. And she was incredible Catholic. And so getting to know her, she would go to mass on Sundays. I would go to my church services. She would go to hers. Was kind of separated a little bit because I was, to an extent, I even kind of still am. I don't really talk about my faith that much. A lot of it is very internalized with a lot of things, but particularly with my faith. But just talking with them, getting to know them, and really just, I guess, being exposed to Catholicism through them. And so I had a couple other friends at my school who were Catholic as well. And this is, Southern State School in the Bible Belt, basically. So a lot of evangelicals. There's a very, very large non-denominational church mega complex type deal, like campuses all over the place, probably like 10 to 15 campuses now across the state. That's very, very big. And it started just down the road from our university. So a lot of people were very involved in that. And I knew that, I went to I thought it was very good Presbyterian church in my college town. Really liked the pastor, really great place, good mix of it was straight laced like the one I had grown up in as a kid, but also a little more relaxed, like the one I went to in high school, so a little in between. But I started to explore my faith more, and there was one time I remember before my fifth year of college when I did start to think about Catholicism that summer. I was looking at some stuff online, briefly talked about it with my roommate who's Catholic, and then another friend we had. And I maybe mentioned it to my wife or two, and maybe mentioned going to RCIA, but I never really followed through with it just because I was kind of busy. And I don't actually know if I've shared this before, but and you can cut this if you want, but I remember vividly, it was August, late July, something like that, sitting there at my dining room table in my college apartment and thinking about this. And I remember, I think, at the time, and I kind of partially still do now, I'm not 100% sure, do think the Blessed Mother, said something to me. Don't exactly remember what, but I remember having that impression. I'm not sure I just thought, I don't know what it was, but that stuck with me. And, I didn't convert to Catholicism at the time, but I did start to dive more into intellectual stuff with the faith, like reading the Presbyterian catechism, the Westminster catechism, reading in that, reading at articles online. I didn't really dive into him too much, but getting, R.C. Sproul books. He's the big Presbyterian Calvinist type thinker. Really wanting to understand intellectually a lot of things. I wanted to make sure I believed the right things, or I, understood things the right way. I would, I had a notebook that I would take to church services and, take notes on the sermons. And, Pastor Sinclair was our pastor there. He gave great sermons, very long, like 30 to 40 minutes at least, but great exposition. So for me, I'm an academic. And so for me, hearing that was what I really enjoyed, was the academic side. There was some emotional side as well, but really the academic side. So as I started to dive into it more, I think that in some ways opened me up to Catholicism. Because I believe it was one summer, I think it was at my parents' house. I was reading an article from the Gospel Coalition talking about Sola Scriptura, talking about how, our understanding, the Protestant understanding of Sola Scriptura had been kind of warped. And it should be Sola Scriptura, not like Nuda Scriptura or so. They worded it in a weird way, but in the context of the article, it made sense. Basically, they're saying, tradition is important, right? This, a lot of Protestants think read the Bible as if no one had ever read it before. That article makes the point, this is a very recent innovation. Reformers, Protestant reformers thought of it in this way. It was always building upon tradition, and that I think in some ways opened the door some to Catholicism for me. That deepening intellectual curiosity, and it was really a gradual opening, I guess. And I think there was, and then going to grad school and reading, European history books talking about, late medieval, early modern Catholicism. I can't remember any specifics off the top of my head, but I gained an appreciation for Catholicism through what I read there. It really it helped to change my view of the Catholic faith, because I did believe some of the Protestant propaganda. It's these people didn't really know what they're believing. They're semi-pagan. They weren't church. All this type of stuff, right? You hear all that stuff, and then you start to think, wait a second. So you're saying from St. Augustine to Martin Luther, there's no one who used church ministry for 1,200 years. Okay, that's ridiculous. And learning about it was Stripping of the Altars, and I can't remember who wrote that book, but that book was highly, highly influential. I was in grad school reading a ton, so I didn't read the whole book. I gave it a cursory grad school read, but even that book, even that book though really changed the way I saw Catholicism. That was very good. There was Holy Feast, Holy Fast. That was another one that was very good, as well as I think it was Autumn of the Middle Ages. But a few of those books really just changed the way I viewed Catholicism. They really showed me how vibrant it was, and how it just was a completely different worldview that I had been exposed to. And it was just very, very illuminating. It's really hard to, say, because, even though I grew up religious, we are in a secular world, and the way the world our calendar works, our sense of time and seasons, it's very secular. But the way Catholicism was oriented, even today, but especially back then, it was completely different. I'm this is such a different way of life, and it really opens my eyes to history, because I'm academic history, that's my thing. And so that really helped change my understanding of it. And I know this is getting a little long-winded, but I remember, so this goes back to there's another thing I very vividly remember, because I remember, my now wife and I, we've gotten engaged around late 2017, early 2018, and I was going to school in my home state, but she was living about 4 hours away in her hometown. And so I was going to move there to be closer to her. She was living with her parents, and I was going to get a place there because I was at a place in my studies where I didn't have to be on campus anymore. I remember in my apartment or in the house I was renting with some other guys in the grad program, we were just discussing this type of stuff. And I was like, my wife is, my fiance is Catholic. I'm not really planning on converting, I remember where I was standing. I remember where I was, like, exactly where I was standing and all that stuff. I was like, it would take an act of God for me to become Catholic. And then this was, May, June, something like that. And then fast forward 2 months later, I'd made the decision to convert. And so it was funny, I moved to the city my wife was living in, and she was like, hey, let's go to mass. And, she was like, we're living in the same town, let's go to mass together. And I was like, okay, fine, I'll give it a shot. And it's crazy. I was like, you know what? Okay. And I think I had already kind of been, even though I had said that to my friends, a month or a couple months prior, I still think the wheels were kind of turning in my head about Catholicism. And so when I was there, it was a very, very beautiful church. And just, I don't know, I was just sitting there and I was like, because it's in the Gothic style, very European. It's vernacular mass, but still, it was very, very beautiful. And I got the wheels turning, and I started thinking to myself, maybe I'll think about this some more. And I remember, shortly thereafter, I was looking up when their RCIA classes were. I bought a catechism, and I bought a rosary, and very quickly I was like, this is the right thing. This is what I want to do. And so I guess, long story short, here I am now.
That's awesome. So you said you had mentioned to your friends, like, it would take an act of God for me to become Catholic. And then you said it was like 14 months later that you kind of found.
Oh, no, it was only like a few months later.
Oh, okay.
Like 2 or 3, I'd say,
okay.
Or maybe 4, but it was very, very quickly. Yeah, very quickly later.
That's amazing. I guess one should be careful when saying that, because it's kind of tempting.
Yeah. I've learned to watch my tongue.
Gotcha. So then, what was your experience of RCIA? Which, again, for those listening, that's the process by which an adult joins the Catholic Church.
Yeah. So I know some people, RCIA experiences I know can be very varied. I was very blessed. Mine was very good. I was very vibrant parish, very large parish. But our Monsignor, he was great when he would stop in. The people who run RCIA were fantastic people. They were very, very devoted. The class was very well organized. It was a very, very good class. And for me, it's funny. I took, I wrote earlier today, I knew we were going to talk, and so I've been writing some stuff down. And one thing I've always come back to is that, when I made a decision that I want to convert, I started looking to other people's conversion stories or reading up. I think it was Patrick Madrid. I think that's the name. He had some books. Older books about conversion stories that I read and looked into. On YouTube, I found, so Scott Hahn, when he had these, I assume they're old, like cassette tapes, that he would pass out about his conversion, and I found the YouTube version of it. So I listened to that all the way through. But in a lot of these conversion stories, you hear people, they're like, I would stay up until the wee hours in the morning, like 2, 3 in the morning, poring over text, poring over the Bible, reading all this stuff for months and months and years. And for me, it was like, that wasn't my experience. I'm an intellectual person, and so I would think I would really dive into it. But for me, I was like, this just feels right. It feels like what I'm supposed to do. And what really helped me was, since I'm an academic and since so much of my reading is trying to figure out on my own, like, I take other people's words for it, so, but, putting all together, it's like, what do I believe? Whether it's something with history or, something I'm studying, like a topic, like, okay, which historian's interpretations, right? Or when it came to the faith, a lot of it was me figuring out on my own, like, what was the right thing when I was a Presbyterian, right? Like, what exactly, all these, like, penal substitution, atonement, like, all these types of things that were, I don't want to say tiring, but they were kind of tiring. It was kind of tiring to have to constantly feel like I had to read, like, I felt like I had to read everything, right? Like, all these big books, all these scholarly texts, like, make sure I had it exactly right. And so what was nice to me about Catholicism was that had already been done for me, right? I didn't have to laboriously spend hours and hours, all this time. Like, some people to convince themselves that this was the right decision, they did have to go through that. But for me, I feel like, thankfully, I didn't have to do that. And I felt like, once I was convinced that the church was correct, then I was like, then I don't have to worry about anything else, right? I don't, like, all these nuanced topics, I don't have to spend hours poring over this. Like, I just have to, I don't want to say just have to show up, but like, I don't have to stress about it, right? It's been figured, there are people who devote their entire lives to figuring this out for me. And I know they're right? I know the church is right on this.
So you are very intellectual. Was that freeing for you, or was that something that you kind of had to let go of to not have to be like doing all of the study on your own with some of those things?
Oh, it was definitely very, very freeing. And I think that's one of the big draws to me. Like, I knew if I wanted to, I could still do a deep dive. Like, I still like doing those deep intellectual dives, but it wasn't necessary. Whereas with Presbyterian, I felt like it was necessary. Like, I felt like I had to do it. Like, it was imperative. But for this, I'm like, I can do it, but it's not necessary. Right? Like, my faith is not dependent upon my own brain. And sometimes I was Presbyterian, it felt that way. And so, I did kind of do a deep dive. I wanted, one of the things, Presbyterian, Calvin's view of salvation is very, very convincing. And so at first I wanted to make sure like some of it could kind of fit, kind of that view of grace could fit into Catholicism. Catholic answers are very helpful there, but really understanding that oftentimes Catholics and Protestants are talking past one another. We use different terms. I used to know which one used which, and I don't remember now, but one side views sanctification, justification as separate. The other one views them as the same thing, or I really figured out there was a lot of talking past, especially when it came to like works and stuff like that. I think early on I realized that, like, to an extent, Protestants, some more Reformed Protestants at least, with what I was, like Presbyterians, Catholics meant almost the same thing when they're talking about like works. I was like, I had that Protestant understanding of like, I thought Catholicism was, work-based salvation. And I realized that, like, that's not quite how it is. Because I was like, when I was Protestant, I used to think, like, it's important to, like, be saved and stuff like that, but you have to, like, act upon it. And I was like, Catholicism, I'm like, wait a second, that's what Catholicism teaches, right? Like, it's, the works you do are through grace or outcropping grace, all that stuff. And so that started to make sense to me. And I did that dive into it, preliminary to make sure that some of it fit. But after that, I was like, this makes sense. I don't need to like laboriously pore over everything.
Gotcha. So was that kind of maybe one of the main issues that you had to work through? Was there anything else that maybe took a little bit of wrestling to accept, or again, you just felt very free to accept the teachings that you were learning?
I think a little bit of both. So I coming into it, so some people, particularly those who are coming from more of a low church Protestant background, whether non-denominational evangelicals or some Methodists, I guess, but definitely like Southern Baptists, I think struggle with the Eucharist. And for me, at least my understanding of the Presbyterian understanding, so I could have been wrong, was it was kind of a halfway house to Catholicism, right? So Presbyterianism is, taught it isn't just a memorial. Like, we believe Christ is spiritually present in some way. And so, there was somewhat of a reverence to it, or at least I developed kind of a reverence to it. I thought it was important and stuff. Even though one did it once a month or whatever, but 4 times a year or something like that. But I still kind of developed reverence towards it and thought there was more to it than just, like, I knew, like, I believed then it was just like bread and grape juice, right? But I feel like spiritually there's more to it than, say, what maybe some Southern Baptists believe. And so for me, it was a little bit easier there making that jump. And really, I think once when I was reading and really just kind of like some of the arguments from history about the Catholic Church, yes, there were issues here and there, but like when, Christ said he would send the Holy Spirit to watch over the church, he did, right? He wasn't like, the Holy Spirit has not abandoned the church,
Yep.
right? It would not abandon the church. And so in learning more about the history of the church through late antiquity into the early and middle ages, and, learning about that and learning about through the Holy Spirit, like the church's authority on teaching, and reading about how the Greek was used when Christ said, eat this, this is my, you have to eat my flesh, to the crowd. Someone, I read the words he used in the original language weren't just, eat something, right? It was very visceral, like gnaw on this food. And he repeated it because people didn't believe him, and it led many people to leave. Right? And if he had, why would people leave if he was just talking metaphorically? Right?
Yeah.
And so once I became convinced that, this is the church that Christ founded, right? This is what he was saying. He set these things forth. That was one of the first things I became convinced of, right? That the Catholic Church is the church that Christ established, and he sent the Holy Spirit to protect it. And once I became convinced of that, and, the Eucharist and stuff, everything else very easily fell into line for me. I'm like, if this is the church Christ established, right? Then their teachings on this are right, and this, and this. And so I don't have to, it kind of goes back to what I was saying about the intellectual stuff. Like, if they teach this, then it's true. So I don't have to spend my time worrying about or diving into it, right? It's just true. And so for me, that was very liberating. I felt like very freeing. Right? I could easily say, like this, and I don't know, I'm not making sense here at the end, but it was just very liberating, and freed me of having to do a lot of struggle sessions, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so you're in RCIA, and then you joined the church. I guess what year was that?
2019.
Okay, cool. All right, so then you became Catholic, and then you're Catholic. So what was that like? Was it what you expected? Was it surprising? Was it similar, maybe more similar, less similar to being a Protestant than you expected?
So I guess I don't really know what I expected, to be honest. It's because before I converted, I kind of considered myself Catholic, right? I was like, I'm going to become a Catholic. I know I am. And so I had that preparation and looking forward to it. And really just it was all about, for me, gaining a real deeper understanding of the church, right? Really going to, my family hasn't been Catholic in a couple of generations. I go back to a great-grandmother in Louisiana or something. She was Catholic. Besides that,
maybe she's been praying for you.
Yeah, you never know. I have thought about that. And really, it was it felt in a way like rediscovering something that I had kind of lost, like all the history, like acclimating myself to the different ways to pray, acclimating myself to just the depth of knowledge and the way the seasons are structured in the church calendar, and just, I mentioned it before, that the parish we went to and the town we're living in, the city we're living in, it was an awesome parish. Our Monsignor was great, beautiful Gothic architecture. I was during some times of the year, during Advent, during Lent, rather than singing, Lamb of God, they would sing Agnus Dei. Rather than saying Holy, 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 they'd sing Sanctus. Incorporating that, incorporating some incense into liturgy. That was, right up my alley. It felt like I was really participating in the in Christianity, like an unbroken thread of Christianity. And in some ways, being as a Protestant, it didn't feel that way, because Protestantism in the United States is so circumscribed. It feels so cut off from the past. Even ancient histories, 1800s, late 1800s, right? All the readers. When I was talking with friends about Protestant friends about what they're really deeply diving into. If it was a secondary, if it wasn't a Bible, if it was a secondary source, it was stuff written in the 1900s. Whereas with Catholicism, I was like, I could read St. Augustine, I could read the Church Fathers, I could read St. Benedict, I could read St. Thomas Aquinas, I could read all this stuff for throughout the centuries, throughout the millennia. And so it really felt like I was connected with something ancient, and that really attracted me to it, especially with that parish I went to. It was very, very helpful. Gosh, what I was going to say, but yeah, but that, I don't know. I feel like that history really helped, and really, I've kind of touched upon something, but as an intellectual, like the church is a really, really great place because you can get as deep dive and intellectual as you want to be. Like you could pore over the Vatican II documents or older church documents, right? You could get really into, Nouveau theology and really dive into Cardinal Ratzinger and stuff like that. Or you can focus more on, more emotional stuff or corporal works of mercy or whatever it is. There is space for you there. You can, and it really is the best of both worlds, right? Like sometimes I don't want to say turn off my brain, but sometimes I can just, go to adoration and I'll pray the rosary, and I don't have to like wrestle over these issues. But if I want to, I can go read, deeply theological books, right? Like the church has like one of the greatest theologians of the 20th century, and that's, Pope Benedict, Pope Emeritus Benedict, and read his writings and people who influenced him. Or I can just, be a stereotypical, Italian church lady and just go pray the rosary adoration every day. There is space for all of that, and it's all celebrated there. And that, to me, was like the best of both worlds. That was like super, I guess, energizing and freeing, and it really just felt right, I guess. And that's really like how I describe so much of like the conversion process. It just felt right. And so I guess I that kind of went astray, but I guess to answer your question, Megan, not everything was hunky dory, right? Becoming Catholic, right? There are some things the church teaches that, Protestant churches don't teach, that can be challenging. And also, I'm sure as you well know, as from a non-Catholic family, there are challenges there with your family. And so, I've had a little bit of those too. I'm not really going to get into them, but it is there. But I would say the benefits outweigh that, right? You're not always arguing. Hopefully, most people don't always argue with their family about stuff, but there were some things here and there. But ultimately, some things have kind of persisted. But it's like ultimately, like the benefits of being in the church far outweigh any worldly disagreement.
Sure, that's awesome. So, in terms of your wife is a cradle Catholic. Like, what? Like, are there any funny stories of, like, obviously your decision to become Catholic was very much your own, and I'm sure your wife was an encouragement to that. But obviously, again, it was very much your decision. What was it like to have her kind of along the way? And I guess when did you guys get married? Was it, I guess, after you became Catholic or before?
Yeah, it was a little bit before I became Catholic. So, I mean, it's funny. We'll talk about it. And, some people, her entire family on her mom's side is like Catholic, Italian, Sicilian Catholic. So they'll joke with her about her dad. Her dad is a convert. My father-in-law is a convert too.
Okay.
So people joke with my wife about her getting me to convert, and she always say, no, it was entirely a decision. Like, she just gave me the space to figure it out. And I remember she was, I think, a little taken aback at how quickly I took to it. And how I was just like, all right, we're going to become Catholic. Or I'm going to become Catholic. She was really, I think, a little bit taken aback by that. Just how quickly, I came about to that decision. And I'm glad that she kind of gave me the space for it a little bit. And I think that introspection that I had, that internalization, was good, and that's just kind of how I work. I think I like to internalize things before I come to a decision. But can't really, gosh, I have to think of a funny moment. I don't know. I can't think of really any funny moments off the top of my head, but I know there definitely were some. And just, learning how to, because in Protestant churches we add a little bit to the Our Father that's said later in a Catholic Mass, and so having to adjust to that a little bit. And the first few times, like, all right, when do I stand? When do I kneel? Like that took a little adjusting, I think.
Awesome. Well, I have one last question. I guess, what would you say to someone like that's maybe interested in becoming Catholic? What encouragement would you give to them?
I would say, obviously go for it, right? There's there's room in the church for everybody, right? You can find your niche, you can find your church community, your part of. You can find the church does so much. You can only be limited by your imagination. If you want to nerd out about theology or history, there's room for that there. If you want to get really involved in corporal works of mercy, it's like, okay, which one do you want to do? Do you want to be in prison? Do you want to help with immigrants? Do you want to help with the homeless? Do you want to work at soup kitchens? Do you want to work with the grieving? Do you want to work in young adult ministry? Do you want to work with kids? Do you want to work with high schoolers? Like, there is so much there for you. Do you want to have a Catholic book club? Do you want to have a Bible study? Like, whatever it is, do you want to go to adoration? Do you want to, pray the rosary all the time? And, I haven't really mentioned too much, but really, like, one of the things that really struck me was that Catholicism does not have simply like a here and now mindset. The feast of the Immaculate Conception, right? Catholicism really acknowledges that God is not bound by time and space, right? Mary was immaculately conceived. She was saved by Christ before she was even conceived, right? God is so far outside of time and space. We cannot comprehend God. And Catholicism really has room for that, right? The sacrifice of the Mass is the same sacrifice, it's kind of silly, but basically like a portal in time, more or less, right? It's so there is that intellect, but there's also so much room for the supernatural as well. And so there is so much room in Catholicism for everything, and really just like Eucharistic adoration is such a part of that. Like that either like Christ is not just spirit, Christ is really present in the Eucharist. To me, that is just like it's just the symbolism and the history and tying it all back to, I think it was Brandon Petrie Dr. Brandon Petrie talks about a lot, like the Jewish roots of the Eucharist or the Jewish roots of Mary, like all this history that's like, it's still here, right? It didn't go anywhere. And to me, that was this is awesome. When I started RCIA, they had a summer RCIA class and not everybody went through. And it's because that was when, 2018, like middle 2018, that's when a lot of, scandal was happening about, Pennsylvania and with child abuse and stuff like that. And I'm like, I joined at one of the worst possible times, right? It's, I still did it, right? And there's just, I don't know, like the church is so large and there's just so much to it. And to me, it is like, I can't imagine my life without it, right? It will completely change your life. Like becoming Catholic completely changed my life, and not just how I act, what I do. Like one of my favorite things about being Catholic is confession, right? Like obviously, like we all hate sinning, and I thought the Catholic distinction between moral and venial sin was kind of silly, but like confession is, life changing, right? The graces of confession have changed my life. Catholic theology on grace and the sacraments, and like I've experienced that firsthand, right? I didn't really believe it before, but to me, I believe that, right? I saw it, I experienced it, and it was so I keep on saying life changing, but it really was life changing. Just my entire worldview has changed. What I believe has completely changed, and that can be scary, right? It can lead to conflict, but I am so thankful for it. Like I feel like I'm such a better person. I feel more complete person, feel more whole person after becoming Catholic, and it really, really has been. Sometimes I kind of wish I could go over do it again just because it was so much fun. But going that long without the Eucharist does suck. But really, like if anyone's thinking of becoming Catholic, I cannot recommend it enough. Buy rosary, buy catechism, and just start going through it. Paragraph by paragraph. If you're really into theologically dense text, start there. If you're into devotions, if you're into relying on the saints, really helped me as well. That really tied me into the history of the church, history of Christianity. Realizing I wasn't praying to saints, I was asking them to help in your life, and understanding that in the faith we do not truly die, right? And there are people who intercede for us. As said in the Bible, like a great cloud of witnesses, right? And to me, that was very, I'm gushing about it, right? But there's so much to me that's just like looking back at it, like this is just so exciting to me, right? It just really, really altered my life, and I felt like for my entire 20-something years of life beforehand, I'd been missing so much. And it's like I had been seeing in black and white in 2D. And then all of a sudden, cloud came, veil was lifted from my eyes, and everything I saw now was three-dimensional in color. It'd be like if all your life you'd grown up on 1930s Mickey Mouse cartoons, and then you go and see a 3D movie in 2020 or 2019 or whatever, right? It was just, but that difference is how I would explain. I'd been, because I grew up near the water, and so I used to swim all the time. It's like if I was swimming in muddy, brackish water, and all of a sudden someone dropped me in the Great Barrier Reef, and just my vision just basically completely changed basically overnight.
That's awesome. That's so cool. I love all those analogies. That's so cool. Well, man, this has been so much fun to just hear your story. It's been very entertaining just to kind of hear the twists and turns. So just thank you so much, Spencer, for sharing, and thanks everyone for listening.
Yeah, Megan, thanks for having me on.